Hi, my name is Nina. It was 2:08 a.m. when my phone rang. At first, I thought it was the wind, the kind that taps at your windows like it wants in, the kind you feel in your teeth. Then I realized it was the ringtone I'd assigned to her, Marilyn, my mother. I stared at the screen, blinking into the dark. I hadn't spoken to her in months, not since Thanksgiving, when she'd let Victor humiliate me in front of his son, when she told me I needed to grow up and learn respect. But something about that call, at that hour, felt wrong. I answered. "Mom?" Her voice barely registered. It sounded thin, like it was traveling from another world. "Nina," she whispered, "help me." That was it. No explanation, no location, just 2 words soaked in fear. And just like that, my body moved before my brain caught up. I was out of bed, pulling on boots with shaking hands. My coat was still damp from earlier. I'd gone out to bring firewood in, but I didn't care. My keys were on the hook, and the thermos I'd left on the counter yesterday was still half full. "Where are you?" I asked, already heading for the door. There was a pause. I could hear wind on the other end, like she was outside. Then, Ridgeview. The urgent care, off the highway. I can't feel my hands. Then silence. I looked at the screen. The call had dropped. The snow outside had turned to white sheets, blowing sideways. The kind of storm the local news calls historic. My cabin sat just outside Pagosa Springs, tucked between frozen pines and the edge of a forest that went quiet when the sky turned like this. I should have hesitated, should have asked myself why I was about to drive 100 miles through a blizzard for a woman who had chosen someone else, again and again. But I didn't. The truck engine coughed before it turned over, and I sat there for a second, hands on the wheel, heart pounding like a warning bell. I'd been through this before, the panic, the pleading, the emergency, only to be pushed aside again the next week. But this time felt different. The highway was barely visible. Snow came at me like static on a dead TV channel, and the only light came from my high beams cutting through white fog. Every few miles, I passed a snowplow, its orange flash strobing across the trees, and with each passing mile, my mind filled with memories I didn't want to remember. Like that Christmas Eve, 3 years ago, when Victor had made a joke about me being too independent for my own good and told me to stop bringing drama into their peaceful home. My mother had just smiled and said, "You know how she gets." Or the time I called to tell her about a raise I got at work, and she put me on hold for 20 minutes so she could help Chase with something. Chase, Victor's son, the man who called her mom after 6 months and who always looked at me like I didn't belong. I gripped the wheel tighter, the heat blasting at my frozen fingers. "Why now, Marilyn? Why call me? The daughter you dismissed, criticized, forgot, when you're freezing in the middle of the night, and yet..." I was going. Because no matter how many times she chose them over me, I never stopped hoping she'd one day choose me back. Somewhere around mile 72, I pulled over at a turnout. My knuckles were white from gripping the wheel. The storm hadn't let up, and I was driving more on instinct than vision. I took a sip from the thermos. The coffee had gone bitter, but the warmth helped. Outside the window, nothing but snow and shadows. I looked at my reflection in the glass. Hollow eyes, pale skin, lips pressed tight. "Why is it always me?" I whispered. "Why am I always the one driving through the dark?" By the time I reached Ridgeview Urgent Care, the sky had begun to lighten, just barely. That early, cold gray morning light that doesn't feel like hope, just a reminder that the night didn't kill you. The lot was empty, no footprints, no cars, just a snow-covered bench near the gate. And then I saw her. At first, I thought it was a pile of blankets or maybe someone's trash. But as my headlights swept across the chain-link fence, the shape shifted slightly. It was her, curled into herself. No shoes. Her hands red and raw, fingers curled stiff. Her sweater soaked through. A fresh bruise on her cheek, a small cut above her eyebrow. My breath caught in my throat. Not from the cold, from the realization that this This was real. I slammed the truck into park and ran. The wind cut through my jeans like razors. My boots sank into snowdrifts as I reached her. "Mom, it's me, it's Nina." Her head tilted slightly. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I dropped to my knees, yanked the emergency blanket from my coat pocket, and wrapped it around her. Her skin was ice, her limbs limp, her breathing shallow. "You're okay now. I've got you." I don't remember carrying her to the truck, only that my arms ached and I was crying. Not loud, not messy, but the kind of cry that's mostly breathing and disbelief. She weighed so little, like someone who hadn't eaten in days, weeks maybe. Inside the truck, I cranked the heat, blasted it toward her, pulled every spare blanket I had from behind the seat. She murmured something, her voice a flicker. "Don't tell them I called." I froze. Them, Victor, Logan, the men she had chosen over me, the men who left her in the snow. I swallowed hard, forcing calm into my voice. "You're safe now, you're with me." But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that simple, because if they found out she called me, they'd come looking. Back in the truck, the heater was blasting, fogging up the windshield with quick, shallow bursts. Marilyn was wrapped in every blanket I had, her head tilted toward the passenger window, lips slightly parted. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile, like she might vanish if I turned away. I drove slowly down the winding access road, tires crunching over ice, eyes darting between the road and her silhouette. Every few seconds, I checked her breathing. She stirred once, whispered something I couldn't catch. I leaned closer. "What is it, Mom?" She blinked but didn't look at me. "Don't tell them you picked me up." Them again. Even now, after they'd left her out in a snowstorm, she was protecting them. I wanted to scream. Instead, I swallowed my anger like I had all my life and said softly, "Okay, I won't. Not now." When we finally pulled into my driveway just outside Pagosa Springs, dawn was turning the sky a muddy pink. The cabin sat quiet, wrapped in layers of snow and silence. No footprints, no headlights, no threats yet. I carried her inside. Her weight felt wrong, too light. Her wrists like sticks in my hands. I set her gently on the couch and tucked another blanket around her, placing a hot pack beneath her feet, trying to remember everything I'd read about early frostbite. Her fingers were the worst, discolored, waxy, but she could still move them, if only slightly. "I'm going to make you some tea," I said, already in the kitchen. "Don't move, just rest." She didn't answer, but she didn't argue either. The kettle whistled. I poured water over the chamomile bag and carried the mug back, setting it on the table next to her. She was still staring out the window as if half expecting a black SUV to come barreling up the road. I sat down slowly, letting the quiet stretch between us. "You want to talk about it?" I asked gently. Her fingers twitched beneath the blanket. "They didn't mean to." "Not like that," she said. "It just got out of hand." I blinked. "You were left outside in sub-zero temperatures without shoes, Marilyn," I said. "There's no version of that that's okay." She flinched at her name. She always preferred Mom. I think hearing it like that made her feel like a stranger, which, in some ways, she was. She turned her face toward me then. A bruise bloomed across her left cheekbone, faint but visible. A thin cut ran down from her temple. "He just got overwhelmed," she whispered. "Victor didn't think I'd be out there long." I stared at her. "You're defending him." She looked away again. It had always been like this. When I was 10 and Victor slammed the cupboard door hard enough to crack the wood because I spilled juice on the floor, she'd told me, "He's just stressed." When I was 15 and Logan snapped at me for not folding the laundry his way, she said, "You're provoking him, Nina. You know how he gets." By the time I turned 19 and moved out, I stopped expecting her to stand up for me. But I never expected she'd stop standing up for herself, too. I rose and went into the kitchen, more to calm my own heartbeat than for any practical reason. I opened cabinets I didn't need, moved a plate, turned the kettle back on. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just neglect. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was abuse. And she still couldn't see it. Or worse, she did, and chose to stay anyway. When I returned to the living room, she had fallen into a light sleep. I pulled a blanket up around her shoulders and sat across the room, watching the steam curl from the mug of untouched tea. My phone buzzed. Blocked number. I didn't answer. Then another buzz. A text. You should have left her alone. She's not your responsibility. This is family business. I stared at the screen. My grip tightened until the casing creaked beneath my fingers. Victor. Or Logan. Maybe both. I took a screenshot, saved it, then put the phone face down. This was what they did: control, manipulate, threaten from the shadows, all while convincing the world that they were the victims. Later that morning, Marilyn woke. Her lips were chapped, her voice hoarse. I should get back, she mumbled. I stared at her. Back to where? Her eyes flicked toward the window. You know they're looking for you, right? I said. They've already started trying to get into my head. They're scared, she said quietly, that you'll twist everything. I laughed, short, bitter. Twist it? Marilyn, they left you in the snow. Her hands trembled as she tried to sit up. If this gets out, they could lose everything. The house. Victor's job. Chase's reputation. Stop. My voice cut sharper than I meant, but I didn't take it back. You are not responsible for protecting them anymore, especially not after what they did. She was quiet. Then she said, almost in a whisper, It's not that simple. That line, I'd heard it 100 times before. It's not that simple. When she stayed with my father longer than she should have. When she married Victor, even though I told her something about him didn't sit right. When she stopped calling after I told her I didn't want to visit if Logan was living there. It was always complicated, and I was always the one told to understand. But for once, I wouldn't. I took pictures, I said after a while. She looked up sharply. What? Of your injuries. Your hands, your face. Her body went stiff. Nina, no. They're evidence. You might not want to report anything, but if they try to accuse me of something, I need to protect myself. She was quiet for a moment. Then, delete them. I won't. Tears sprang to her eyes. You don't get it. He'll find out. He always finds out. I exhaled slowly. That's the problem, Mom. He always finds out because no one ever stands up to him. She shook her head. You don't know what he's capable of. I do, I said. That's why I'm not backing down this time. She didn't respond, just stared at the fireplace, at the flickering flame, like it held a truth she couldn't say out loud. Eventually, she stood, wobbled a little. I need to rest. I nodded. Take the bedroom. I'll stay out here. She paused, then placed a hand on my arm. Her touch was light, hesitant, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to touch me anymore. Thank you, she whispered, for coming. I said nothing, because I wasn't sure if I came for her, or for the girl I used to be, the one still waiting for her mother to choose her first. Marilyn slept most of that morning. Her body finally gave in, exhaustion pulling her into a deep, dreamless rest. I stayed in the living room, eyes on the road through the window, heart pacing like it knew something was coming. It wasn't paranoia. I knew them. Victor didn't let go of control easily. And Logan? He had always carried himself like he owned every room and every person in it. Still, when the SUV pulled into the driveway just after noon, part of me hoped it was a mistake, a delivery truck, a lost tourist, but it wasn't. The vehicle stopped with a soft crunch of tires on snow. The engine idled for a moment. Then the doors opened. Victor stepped out first, dressed in a black wool coat and leather gloves. His movements were smooth, practiced, like he'd already played out this moment in his head. Behind him came Logan, tall, rigid, expression unreadable behind dark sunglasses. And then, a third man. A stranger. Older. Wearing a suit too crisp for a mountain road. A lawyer. Of course. I stood on the porch before they even made it to the steps. Arms crossed, heart pounding. Victor gave a small smile. "Nina, good to see you." I said nothing. He looked past me toward the cabin. "Is Marilyn inside?" "She's resting," I said flatly. He nodded like I'd confirmed some quiet suspicion. "Well," he continued, voice smooth as silk, "we're here to bring her home. She's been confused lately. Logan and I were worried sick when she disappeared this morning." Logan stepped forward, holding out a manila envelope. "We brought the paperwork. She's under Victor's guardianship. Court-issued, legal." I didn't take it. Instead, I looked directly at the lawyer. "You're really doing this?" I asked. "Trying to drag a woman out of recovery with a snowstorm behind you and bruises on her face?" The lawyer didn't flinch. "Ma'am, our role here is simple. We're enforcing a legal guardianship. If you interfere, you could face civil and possibly criminal charges." Victor's voice dropped. "We don't want trouble, Nina. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." Harder? Like the years I spent watching Marilyn disappear into silence? Like the way they isolated her, eroded her confidence, made her feel like a burden instead of a person? Like dumping her in the snow at 2 a.m. and pretending she walked away on her own? I clenched my fists inside my coat pockets. I wanted to scream, but instead I smiled. "Then we'll let the sheriff sort it out." Victor's smile faded. I pulled out my phone, hit record, and held it casually in front of me. "This is Nina Matthews," I said clearly. "I'm at my private residence in Pagosa Springs. Victor Graham and Logan Graham have shown up with an unknown third party claiming legal authority over my mother, Marilyn Matthews, who is currently recovering from exposure and suspected physical abuse. I am requesting a wellness check and protective presence from local law enforcement." Then I ended the call. Victor's mask cracked for the first time. "You've always been dramatic," he said. "Always twisting facts to get attention." "No," I said, voice steady. "What I've always done is survive. What she's doing now is surviving. You don't get to interrupt that." Logan scoffed. "She's our family." "No," I snapped, stepping forward. She was convinced to sign over her rights while isolated and manipulated. That's not family. That's coercion. Victor raised a finger, tone suddenly sharp. "You don't understand what she needs. She's fragile. She forgets things. She doesn't eat. She doesn't sleep." I took another step down so we were eye to eye. "None of that explains the bruises on her ribs, the voicemail I have of you screaming at her, the text messages threatening me just hours ago." For a beat, no one spoke. Then Logan's jaw twitched. "What do you want, Nina?" he asked. "A fight? A lawsuit? Attention? You think she's going to thank you for this?" "I don't want thanks," I said. "I want her safe. And until the police get here, no one's coming inside." Victor started to speak, but the faint sound of sirens in the distance stopped him. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward the road. Logan swore under his breath. Victor glanced at the lawyer, then back at me. "This isn't over." "I know," I said, "but for once, I'm ready." 10 minutes later, Deputy Lewis pulled up in a sheriff's cruiser. He stepped out calmly, one hand resting on his belt. Victor rushed to him first, producing documents, speaking fast, gesturing toward me in the cabin like a man trying to cover his tracks. I waited until the deputy walked over to me. "You Nina Matthews?" I nodded. "And your mother's inside?" "Yes, she's safe, injured, recovering from exposure. She asked me to pick her up last night. She's terrified of them." Deputy Lewis looked back at the 3 men by the SUV. "I've dealt with Victor before," he said under his breath. "A little too polished for a mountain man. Mind if I talk to your mom directly?" "Of course," I said, "but be gentle. She's scared." Marilyn was sitting up when we entered the cabin. She looked between me and the deputy, eyes wide. "It's okay," I said softly. "You're not in trouble. He just wants to make sure you're okay." Lewis knelt beside her. "Ma'am, I'm Deputy Lewis with the Archuleta County Sheriff's Office. Are you here of your own free will?" She hesitated. I held my breath. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Yes." "Are you afraid of the men who came to your house today?" Another pause. Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. He turned to me. "That's all I needed." Back outside, Lewis informed Victor and his team that Marilyn was choosing to stay, and there were no legal grounds for removal without a court hearing. Victor's face darkened. Logan muttered something I couldn't hear. The lawyer simply nodded and returned to the car. As they pulled away, Victor locked eyes with me through the windshield. There was no more politeness in his stare, just anger, maybe fear. Good. He should be afraid, because this time I wasn't the scared little girl. I was the woman who finally said no, and meant it. The snow stopped that night, but the cold stayed. Inside my cabin, it felt like time had frozen. Marilyn slept most of the day, and when she was awake, she was quiet, withdrawn, like a person still waiting for punishment to fall. She spoke in hushed tones, flinched at sudden sounds. Even the hum of the heater made her jump. I gave her space, let her sip tea at her own pace, sat nearby when she needed company, and vanished into the other room when she didn't. But I didn't stay idle. That evening, I dug out a plastic storage bin from my bedroom closet. Inside were years' worth of forgotten things. Old journals, photos, receipts I'd meant to file but never did. Somewhere near the bottom, I found what I was looking for, a flash drive from 5 years ago. Back when Marilyn first married Victor, she'd asked me to help set up their home network. I'd installed security cameras around their house, mostly at her request. "I just feel better knowing things are being recorded," she'd told me, "just in case." At the time, I didn't think much of it, but I made a habit of saving backup copies of footage to this drive. Old habit from my IT job. I plugged it into my laptop. It took nearly 2 hours to sort through the grainy, date-stamped clips. But around the 3-year mark, I found it. Footage from a winter night. Victor yelling, voice booming through the living room. Marilyn seated on the couch, eyes downcast, not speaking. He stood over her, accusing, mocking. Then in a flash, his hand raised. The clip ended there. Not enough to prove assault, but enough to raise serious concerns. I marked the timestamp and copied the file onto a new USB drive. Then I opened my phone and scrolled through recent voicemails, the last one Victor left. The one where his voice cracked with rage. "You think anyone's gonna believe you? You can freeze out there for all I care. Maybe next time you'll learn." I saved that too. The next morning, I called the local legal aid center. They referred me to Daniel Price, a private attorney specializing in elder abuse and guardianship disputes. When I called, he picked up on the third ring. "Ms. Matthews," he said after I gave my name. "I've heard of the Grahams before, never good things." I explained the situation, briefly but clearly. He listened without interrupting, then said, "Bring what you have. Today. If they've already tried to reclaim her once, they'll try again, but louder." His office was about an hour away in Durango. I bundled Marilyn in a thick coat and scarf, helped her into the truck, and drove through slushy streets until we pulled into a brick building with a small brass plaque. Daniel Price, Esquire, Elder Law, Family Protection, Estate Defense inside. The office smelled like leather and pine cleaner. The waiting area had a fireplace, faux but warm. A secretary offered us tea. Daniel himself was in his mid-50s, with silver hair, wire-frame glasses, and a calmness that felt earned, not rehearsed. He shook my hand, then Marilyn's gently. We sat across from him in a private room. I slid the USB drive across the desk and showed him the voicemail on my phone. He watched and listened without blinking. When it ended, he nodded once, then turned to Marilyn. "Ma'am," he said gently, "can I ask you a few things directly?" She hesitated. I reached over and gave her hand a soft squeeze. "It's okay." Daniel spoke slowly, clearly. "Do you feel safe returning to your husband's home?" "No," she said quietly. "Has he ever hit you?" She looked at her hands, then nodded. Daniel made a few notes. "Has he ever controlled your money, your ability to leave the house, or limited who you could speak to?" She nodded again. "And did you sign any guardianship or power of attorney documents under pressure?" Her voice cracked. "He said it was just in case, that I was forgetful, that it was better for everyone." "Did you understand what you were signing?" "No." That was enough for Daniel. He sat back, exhaled. "Here's what we'll do," he said. "First, I'll file for a temporary restraining order against Victor and Logan, on your behalf and Nina's. That will keep them away while we build the bigger case." Marilyn looked like she wanted to disappear. "Second," he continued, "I'll petition the court to review the current guardianship. Based on what you've just told me, it's highly likely it was signed under duress, and therefore can be challenged and reversed." He glanced at me. "We'll also file for emergency guardianship, with you, Nina, as the temporary guardian. That gives you legal authority to protect your mother from further harm, while this moves through court." I nodded. "And finally," he said, "we'll prepare for the hearing. That voicemail, that video, it won't win the whole case, but it opens the door. The rest will be in Marilyn's testimony." That was the hard part, because even after everything, the bruises, the silence, the snow, she still wasn't sure if she could speak. In the car on the way home, she stared out the window the entire time. "They'll say I'm lying," she murmured, "that I'm confused, that I'm sick." "They'll try," I said, "but this time, we're not walking in alone." That night, I lit a fire, made soup, put on the old playlist we used to listen to when I was a kid, soft piano, a little Norah Jones. We sat on the couch in silence for a while. Then she asked, "Do you hate me?" The question landed like ice water. "No," I said softly. "I wanted to, but I don't. I let them push you out. Yes, I let them hurt me. You did. And now I'm asking you to fix it." I turned toward her. "No," I said. "You're asking me to stand beside you. There's a difference." She looked at me, tears in her eyes. "Do you think I can do this?" "I think you already did," I whispered. "The moment you called me that night, you stopped letting them win." Courtroom 3C smelled like cold paper and tension. The wood-paneled walls, the low murmur of legal aides shuffling documents, the sound of the judge's gavel echoing like a warning. It all reminded me of every moment in my life where I'd been told to sit down, be quiet, and don't make waves. But not today. Today I sat beside Marilyn at the front table, our lawyer, Daniel Price, on her left. She wore a soft blue sweater. I'd braided her hair that morning. Something simple, something steady. Her hands trembled a little, but her back was straight, her eyes clear. On the other side of the room sat Victor, his jaw tight, his posture perfect. Logan leaned back in his seat with that same smug indifference he always wore, like nothing could touch him. Between them, their own legal team, 2 men in crisp suits and 1 woman with a voice like gravel and ice. Their strategy was clear: discredit, disarm, and deflect blame. But we had something they didn't: the truth. The hearing began with formalities. Judge Monroe, a woman in her 60s with gray curls pinned tight, looked over the case file. "Ms. Matthews," she said, glancing at Marilyn, "you are currently under a legal guardianship granted to Mr. Victor Graham, correct?" Marilyn nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "But today you're petitioning the court to terminate that arrangement." She took a breath. "Yes, I am." "Do you feel safe under Mr. Graham's guardianship?" No. A murmur stirred in the courtroom. Judge Monroe raised an eyebrow. Then let's proceed. Victor's attorney stood first. He painted a familiar picture. Marilyn was frail, forgetful, easily confused. She'd wandered off during a storm, not been abandoned. Nina, they claimed, was estranged, emotionally unstable, and manipulating her mother to regain control. She's doing this, the lawyer said, to settle old grudges. I didn't move. Neither did Daniel. We'd expected this. We'd prepared. Then it was our turn. Daniel stood and calmly laid out the timeline. Marilyn's call for help at 2:08 a.m. Her condition when found: shoeless, bruised, hypothermic. Her own recorded testimony. The voicemail from Victor, where he told her to freeze out there. The security footage showing his verbal threats. Photos of bruising. But the real moment came when Marilyn herself stood up to speak. The courtroom went still. She took the stand, hands clenched tight in her lap. "Mrs. Matthews," Daniel began gently, "can you tell the court how long you've been afraid of your husband?" Her voice wavered, but didn't break. "Since the second year of our marriage. At first it was just yelling, then controlling my accounts, then not letting me see Nina. And the night you were left at Ridgeview Urgent Care?" She looked directly at Victor. "He told me I needed to learn a lesson." The gasp that rippled through the courtroom was real. Logan shook his head, muttering under his breath. Victor, for once, didn't smile. Cross-examination was brutal. Victor's lawyer tried every tactic, questioning her memory, implying Nina had planted ideas, pointing out her past mental health history, a single bout of anxiety after my father died. But Marilyn held. Every time they tried to twist her words, she returned to the same truth. He didn't protect me. He controlled me. And when asked why she didn't speak up sooner, she said simply, "Because I thought it was normal, until my daughter reminded me it wasn't." When it was over, the judge called a recess. Outside in the hallway, Marilyn slumped into a chair like her bones had given out. Daniel sat beside her. "You did perfectly." She nodded, eyes shining. "I feel lighter." I crouched next to her. "You were brave, Mom." She looked at me then, really looked, not through me, not past me, and said, "Thank you for coming when I called." I squeezed her hand. "You called. That was everything." Back in the courtroom, the judge made her ruling. "I am granting temporary termination of the current guardianship," she said. "Effective immediately. All legal control is revoked from Mr. Graham. I am appointing Nina Matthews as temporary guardian, pending final review. Further investigation will be required, but based on the testimony, documentation, and witness evidence provided, it is the court's determination that continued control by the previous guardian poses potential harm." Victor stood abruptly. "This is a mistake." Judge Monroe raised her eyes. "Sit down, Mr. Graham. You're not in control here." Outside the courthouse, the cold hit us like a wall. But for the first time, it didn't feel threatening. It felt clean, sharp, real. Marilyn tucked her arm into mine. "They're going to come after you now," she said. I nodded. "Let them try." Logan brushed past us on the steps, muttering, "This isn't over." "No," I said, "but it's not your story anymore." That night, back in the cabin, we lit a fire and sat in its glow. Not talking, not explaining, just being. Like we'd finally earned the silence. Later, I opened a drawer and pulled out something I hadn't shown her before. A letter. Written in her handwriting. From years ago. Never mailed, never finished. The last line read, "I'm sorry I didn't protect you the way I should have." I placed it in her hands. She stared at it. "I didn't think you ever saw this," she said. "I found it the night I moved out," I replied. "And I kept it, waiting for the day you might finish it." She folded the paper gently. "I don't think I need to anymore." Spring didn't arrive in Colorado all at once. It crept in slowly. cautiously, like someone unsure if they were really welcome. The snow melted reluctantly. Long icicles broke loose from the eaves, one at a time. The trees seemed to blink awake, uncertain whether it was safe to bloom. But inside our cabin, winter had already ended, not because the calendar said so, but because something inside my mother had shifted. Marilyn started sleeping through the night, not the shallow, anxious sleep that ends with gasping or whispered apologies in the dark, but real sleep, the kind that let her face soften, the kind that gave her body time to repair what had been worn down for years. She didn't ask where her phone was, she didn't mention Victor or Logan, and I didn't bring them up. I had placed her phone in a drawer the day after court, deleted every contact she hadn't chosen herself. I wrote her new list on a notepad by the kitchen phone, names that brought comfort, not fear. Her appetite returned slowly. One morning, I came into the kitchen and found her pouring herself a bowl of cereal, plain, dry, and exactly 3/4 full. "You want milk?" I asked, half joking. She looked at me like I'd asked if she wanted to fly to Paris. "I forgot I could just have this," she said, then gave a tiny laugh. "He hated when I bought cereal." That was all she said. But it was enough to remind me, freedom doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it's just a quiet breakfast in your own home. That week, I scheduled follow-ups with her doctor. We did blood work, checked her lungs, X-rayed her shoulder, where I suspected there had once been a push too hard to be an accident. The doctor didn't ask many questions. He just listened. At the end, he gently suggested a trauma therapist who specialized in older adults. To my surprise, Marilyn said yes, not because she had to, but because she finally understood she deserved help. One chilly morning in early April, I found her on the front porch, wrapped in the same gray scarf from the night I picked her up outside Ridgeview Clinic. She stood silently watching the trees sway. The sun barely kissed the tips of the pines. "You okay?" I asked, stepping beside her. She didn't answer right away. Then, "It's cold, but I'm not afraid of it anymore." We didn't talk about Victor much after that. He still hadn't contacted her, probably because of the restraining order. His lawyer had filed an appeal against the guardianship termination, but Daniel said it wouldn't go anywhere. It didn't matter, because for the first time in years, my mother wasn't living in response to a man. She was living for herself. We took small steps. We cleaned out old drawers, donated clothes she never liked but used to wear because they looked respectable. We planted seeds in the backyard, not because either of us knew what we were doing, but because the act of putting something in the ground and believing it would grow felt like the right thing to do. One evening, she joined me in the kitchen while I chopped vegetables. "I used to think cooking was love," she said out of nowhere. "If I made the perfect dinner, maybe they'd leave me alone. Maybe they'd say thank you." She picked up a carrot, ran her fingers over the ridges. "Turns out love isn't supposed to be earned like that." I looked at her. It isn't. Sometimes she'd sit by the fire and just write, scraps of sentences, memories, things she'd never said out loud. One day, she handed me a piece of paper with a single line on it. "I forgive the woman I used to be, because she did what she had to do to survive." I didn't say anything, just folded the paper gently and tucked it into the pages of my journal. That night, she asked if I thought she was too old to go back to school. "To learn what?" I asked. "To write," she said. "Maybe help other women tell their stories." I smiled. "I think it's the best idea you've ever had." The next day, I helped her sign up for a beginner's online writing class. She was nervous, worried she'd be the oldest one, but after the first session, she came out of the bedroom glowing. "They all listened," she whispered, "like what I said mattered." I reached for her hand, because it does. A few days later, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, holding a stack of papers, legal documents, old bank statements, the guardianship paperwork Victor had filed years ago. "I want you to have these," she said, not to hold on to anger, but because I don't want to be afraid of them anymore. I took them, not because I needed them, but because she no longer did. That evening, we sat on the back steps with mugs of peppermint tea, watching the sun slip behind the hills. I used to dream of running away, she said softly. When I was your age, I thought I'd end up in a cottage like this, just me, a garden, and peace. I smiled. Well, you made it. A little later than expected. She chuckled. Maybe, but I'm here now. For the first time in years, I wasn't watching her out of worry. I was just with her. One night, she handed me a story she'd written. It was short. No names, just a woman in a storm who almost gave up until a car stopped, until someone said, "Get in. You're not dying tonight." She titled it, "The Night I Didn't Die." When I finished reading, I looked up and found her already watching me. "Is it okay?" she asked. I nodded. "It's more than okay. It's you, and it's beautiful." I've learned that healing doesn't always mean going back to the way things were. Sometimes it means building something completely new, from the ground up, with steady hands and no apologies. My mother is not the same woman she was. Neither am I. We are not perfect. We are not whole in every place, but we are here. We are free, and that's more than I ever dared to hope for. Spring arrived like an old friend, unhurried, familiar, soft. By the time May came around, the snow had vanished from our hillside, replaced by patches of green that pushed through the thawed ground like they had something to prove. The trees had leafed out fully, the birds returned with their busy morning chatter, and my mother, Marilyn, began her days not with fear, but with purpose. And on one of those mornings, she decided to plant a garden. I watched from the porch as she worked the soil, wearing a floppy sun hat and oversized gloves that made her hands look smaller than they were. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Each scoop of dirt, each buried seed was a kind of ceremony. 3 months ago, this same woman couldn't hold a coffee mug without trembling. 3 months ago, she whispered apologies into the dark like prayers she didn't believe would be answered. Now she hummed while planting snapdragons. You'd think it was a small thing, but for us, it was everything. We didn't mark the days anymore with court filings or therapy sessions. We marked them by how long she could walk before needing to rest, by how many recipes we tried from old cookbooks she once hid away in a box labeled "Someday." We laughed more, sometimes hard, sometimes just enough. Even silence between us no longer carried weight. It felt peaceful now, like neither of us needed to fill the air with explanation or regret. One afternoon, while sorting through boxes in the attic, I found an old cassette tape, labeled in faint pencil, Nina, age 5, story time. I brought it downstairs, heart caught in my throat. Marilyn didn't say a word. She just plugged in the tape player we'd found at a thrift store the month before and pressed play. There it was, my tiny voice reciting a made-up story about a rabbit who wanted to fly. Her voice in the background laughing softly, encouraging me to keep going. She sat back, tears in her eyes. "I forgot how much I loved your voice," she whispered. "You used to," I teased, nudging her. "You said I never stopped talking." "I was wrong," she said. "I just wasn't listening." That night, she wrote a new short story. Title, A Garden in Snow. This one was about a woman who lived most of her life underground, like a seed afraid to bloom, until one spring, after a brutal winter, the ground gave way, and she rose. She handed it to me quietly. "Do you think people will understand it?" I looked her in the eyes. "They don't have to. You wrote it for yourself. That's enough." She nodded, smiling. "Still, it feels good to be heard." Marilyn joined a local support circle online, not to ask for help, but to offer it. She became the voice that answered when someone typed, "I don't know if I can leave." Her response always began the same. "You can, and you don't have to wait until you're not afraid." As for me, I started writing again too, only this time not as an outlet for pain, but a way to celebrate what survived it. I wrote our story, not as a dramatic memoir, not to prove anything, just a quiet, honest account of what happens when a woman who's been dismissed and diminished chooses to stand, and another woman, her daughter, chooses to stand with her. We named it The Night She Called. Maybe we'll print it one day. Maybe we won't. But it exists. And that's what matters. In late May, Marilyn gave her first public reading. It was in a church basement with maybe 20 folding chairs and a bad microphone. Her hands shook when she stepped up. Her voice cracked on the second sentence. But she kept going. She read her story, the one about the storm and the silence and the scarf that someone wrapped around her shoulders when she thought no one would come. When she finished, there was a long, still moment before the applause. Not loud, not wild, just enough to say, "We heard you. We see you. We believe you." On the drive home, she was quiet. Then she turned to me and said, "I didn't think I could ever belong again." I glanced at her. "And now?" She smiled softly. "I'm starting to think, maybe I never stopped. I just forgot." We stopped by the lake that evening. The water was still, a mirror to the sky above. We didn't say much. We just watched the last light of day soften everything it touched. The trees, the hills, and finally, each other. That night, before heading to bed, she paused at my doorway. "You know," she said, "for a long time I thought survival meant not making noise, not drawing attention." She smiled faintly. "But you made noise, you shouted, you stood up, even when I couldn't." I sat up straighter. "I didn't know what else to do." She nodded. "Exactly. You did what you knew. And now, I get to learn from you." The next morning, she started planning a writing group for women in recovery. She wanted to call it Second Chapter. I offered to design the flyers. We don't talk much about Victor anymore, or Logan, not out of fear, but because they no longer take up space in our story. They were a chapter, not the whole book. And me, I'm still here, still writing, still learning how to live in peace after a life built around alarms. But I'm not afraid anymore. Not of silence, not of storm warnings, not of the phone ringing at 2 a.m., because now I know what to do. Now I know how to choose peace. And more importantly, how to protect it. This story doesn't end with a victory. It ends with a morning, a garden, a smile that doesn't ask for permission, and the sound of two women laughing at nothing in particular, just glad to be alive. Thank you for joining us on Nina and Marilyn's journey, a story of pain, courage, and finally, healing. We've seen that it's never too late to stand up, to speak out, and to start over. If you've ever felt silenced or afraid, know this: your story matters. Your voice matters. And help can begin with a single word: enough. You don't need a title to be a protector. You don't need permission to love fiercely. And real love? It doesn't ask for credit. It simply shows up and stays. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. And always remember, you matter, and your love leaves a mark.